Friends, welcome to this program on open education resources and practices. We will discuss about open education resources and also we will discuss about open education practices. We will discuss what is open, get into open education resources, and finally end up with how we should proceed to develop an open education practices. So let me proceed to discuss what do we mean by open. Whether it's a face-to-face campus, college or university, or it's a dual mode distance teaching university, or it's an exclusive open university, openness is possible everywhere. But it's more possible in an independent open university like Indira Gandhi National Open University or the British Open University called United Kingdom's Open University. Because even if you are teaching face-to-face within the classroom or you are teaching at a distance, openness could be built into in both the situations. As you see on your screen, distance education is a teaching, learning and arrangement which takes place at a distance, mediated by varieties of communication technology, information and communication technology, varieties of media. And teacher becomes one of the media which establishes connection between the institution and the students. But when an institution wants to become open, in a formal system they could, but an open university or a distance teaching university could become open very easily, more easily than the face-to-face college or university. For instance, as you see on your screen, an open education basically is removing all kinds of restrictions as much as possible so that there is an access and equity to the students. That remove their age barriers, previous academic achievement, socioeconomic status, and so on and so forth, so they can enter into the institution. There could be technological facilitation, there could be organizational practice facilitation, there will be institutional other facilitation mechanisms to ensure the students get an easy access to the institution, including reduction of the fee structure, because higher the fees, it will be very difficult for students to enter college or university. So therefore, open education is more possible in an open university context, and therefore it may be very difficult to introduce that in a traditional college or university. But when we get into open learning is a curricular issue, whereas open education is more philosophical, ethical, and the political issue, and therefore is an institutional issue. But open learning is between the teachers and students and the curriculum. Open learning is possible very much within the face-to-face classroom, and open learning is certainly needed in an open university or distance education context. Open learning is, as I have written there, individualized and flexible learning pathways. That if your curriculum design is such that the professors, they would try their best to provide access to individual students based on their own choices, needs and abilities and their own learning styles and therefore their learning pathways. So in the classroom, it could be possible more than what it could be possible in an open university context with millions of students getting admitted, because in a classroom there could be 50, 100 students, for instance. It would be easy to do that. So the distinction between open education and open learning. But we go a little bit ahead and examine that what is an open educational resources. That open educational resources are educational materials which are declared under Creative Commons, CC, that we will see in detail. But open education resources could be used within the classroom, and open education resources should also be used in open university and distance education context. Sometimes they would say that massive open online courses, MOOCs, whether they are open education resources, if the MOOCs are declared under Creative Commons, they would become open education resources, otherwise they will become proprietary. Sometimes MOOCs are free, and in many cases that students have to pay for the MOOCs. If you have to transfer your credit to your mainstream certificate, diploma or degree, you have to pay for that MOOCs. Otherwise, generally, MOOCs are free of cost. If you compare that with the Swayam platform of Indian national context, for instance, which are MOOC-based courses, These courses are free for those students, Indian college or university students who have got admitted to their certificate, diploma, degree programs in the colleges and universities. And the Government of India, earlier it was 20%, now it is 40% of the credit hours that the students can take from the Swayam, and those will be accredited within the student's academic bank of credit, and 60% from the classroom interaction, and so on and so forth, would be leading to what is called a new kind of degree. And the National Education Policy 2020 talks more about this in detail. So therefore, friends, we will examine open education resources in this program. That's our focus. Given that you are into an open education and there is practice of open learning and there is use of open education resources, but what is more important is open sharing. Even if all these things are there, but professors don't share. They would like to share from others, but they would not like to share their own resources in the common public domain called Creative Commons, or to declare that as open education resources. So open sharing is use for free and share for free. And these days, you might have seen when you go to download some free resources, they would simply say, sorry, unless you upload your authentic resources, we would not let you download free of cost. Sometimes they ask for that. If you could still a step ahead, that I would call as, or generally it is called as open pedagogy. Open pedagogy is a context where all the above that you see have been utilized within the framework, curriculum design and teaching learning, but with an additional facility that is teacher-learner collaborative learning design. That simply means teachers and learners are free to generate their own content and decide the way they would like to proceed, provided they respect that your curriculum and content remain constant and your learning outcomes remain constant. Finally, they would deliver you the learning outcome that is intended for. So therefore, that would be called as an open pedagogy context. And finally, friends, open education, open learning, open education resources, open sharing, and open pedagogy, all joining together into an institutional mechanism comprehensively would be called as practice of and open educational practices. So therefore, what we must aim at to start with open education, get into open learning, open pedagogy, and finally we must aim at achieving what is called an open education practices, an open educational institution. What is an open education resource? Our colleague, Professor Neil Butcher, Professor Asha Kanwar, and Stameka from the CUL UNESCO 2015 publication is a very comprehensive articulation of what an open education resources today could be called. And therefore, the Commonwealth of Learning and UNESCO have agreed to this definition of open education resources, which in fact started in 2002 by the UNESCO itself. OER as a concept started with UNESCO in 2002. They say, in its simplest form, the concept of open educational resources describes any educational resources including curriculum maps, course materials, textbooks, streaming videos, multimedia applications, podcasts, and any other materials that have been designed for use in teaching and learning that are openly available for use by educators and students without an accompanying need to pay royalties or license fees. So that simply means any kind of resources which have been agreed upon, which have been authenticated, but which have been agreed upon to be declared as open, for which the students do not pay the fees, and those who have created for further use, they will not be paid royalties. That would simply mean this is non-commercial. Let's see different varieties of open education resources. So the pedagogy that I discussed as open pedagogy, but you would call it as OER pedagogy, which is based on 5 R's. So when these 5 R's are applied to teacher activities and learner activities of teaching and learning, we would call these a practice of open pedagogy. For instance, that retain, that the ownership and control will be retained by those who have created and those who are using also. Reuse, that once somebody has created, the other person, if it is agreed, they can appropriate the use and reuse of it. That the owner gives the right to others to use and reuse it. 3, go a step ahead, revise. That as per the needs and requirements of the students and learning contexts, that these materials, print, audio, video, graphics, animation, data, and all kinds of that resource artifacts that we have discussed so far, that you have the permission that you can revise it and reuse it. Go a step ahead, that you could remix, that you take a portion from the OER, a print or a audio, video, or a web-based resource, and or multimedia, then you try to combine that with your resources and adapt those, build in new activities, and say that this is my new course. That remix is possible. And finally, redistribute. That simply means free sharing. Sharing has to be free of revised or remixed materials as well as activities and the teaching learning approaches, because pedagogy is all about approaches, not much about materials. So therefore, all the five, they are present there. You are practicing an OER pedagogy. So friends, now about Creative Commons, which is the international legal authority as a clearinghouse for open education resources. They have said 4 kinds of attribution are possible, as you see on your screen. Attribution that credit the author, symbolized by BY. So if you declare your resources that we are giving attribution to the author, you simply declare CC, CC is common, CC-BY. If you say that this is non-commercial, and generally open education resources are non-commercial, but sometimes you could also make it commercial if you so desire. But basically, one must make it non-commercial. So therefore, CC-NC, non-commercial, don't make money. And you are not allowed to redistribute and resell and make money. You are not allowed that. And there is a symbol for this. No derivatives, that no changes. So if you say CC-ND, you are simply using it as it is without any derivative, without any changes. And finally, if you say CC-SA, you are share alike. That simply means if you have used open education resources to develop your own course, you would also share your course as it was the OER that you have borrowed, that is called share alike. You have also to equal share alike. You cannot take open education resources and develop your own course and then say that I am not sharing my course. No, you are legally bound to share your course. So therefore, friends, these attributions are discussed here. CC-BY, this license lets others to distribute, remix, tweak, and build upon work of others, even commercially. Commercially, it is possible as long as they credit the original author for the original creation. And commercial license is possible in this case, in the attribution CC-BY. Attribution share alike, CC-BY-SA. This license lets others remix, tweak, and build upon the work of original author, even for commercial purposes. But as they read, that highlights the issue here, as long as they credit the author and license their new creations under the identical terms. This license is often compared to copyleft-free and open source software licenses. So you can tweak it with the help of open source software, and this is what is called copyleft. 3. Attribution, non-derivatives, CC-BY-ND. This license allows for redistribution, commercial and non-commercial, as long as it is passed along unchanged and in whole with credit to the original author. That you are not making any change, part or whole, but you give credit to the original author. That simply means you redistribute. Attribution non-commercial, CC-BY-NC. This license lets remix, tweak, build upon the work of original authors non-commercially. This is non-commercially. And although their new works must also acknowledge the author and be non-commercial, that they don't have to license their derivative works on the same terms. Next, attribution non-commercial share alike, as long as they credit the author and license their new creations under the identical terms. And finally, attribution non-commercial, no derivatives. That simply means you cannot commercially sell it, and there is a non-derivative is used to that, as long as they credit you but they can't change them in any way or use them commercially. So no commercial and credit to the original author, and there is a non-derivative or no derivative clause associated with this. So friends, as you see on our screen, the Creative Commons license, which is a quick referencing, is given here, that different kinds of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on the left hand side, and their explanations that in which case what is present, that copy and so on and so forth, commercial, and this is a tabular representation of what I said earlier, and all the tick mark is passing through, say for instance, copy and publish. But once you go ahead a little bit to the right hand side, especially the commercial is only 4 greens, but the rest 2 you do not find commercial, and so on and so forth. And changing of licensing, the last column that you find in the 5 places, but 1 or 2 places you don't find it. So therefore, this is a guide to us to appreciate that what is possible and what is not possible, and therefore you can take a decision insofar as OER location and OER use and reuse is concerned. This licensing is represented in little more detail that you can study with this PowerPoint, which starts with attribution CC BY with the only symbol of one human being, but you go ahead CC by SA, and finally up to attribution non-commercial and non-derives, and there is a little mistake, non-derives over there. So how to locate OER, because different varieties of OERs are available, but on your screen some of the very finest selected and authenticated sites are present, which will provide you different kinds of OER. Global Learning Object-Based Exchange, Foxomatic, DiscoverEd, Creative Commons Share, Open Courseware Consortium, MIT OpenCourseWare, OCW, MedEd Portal for medical education, OpenLearn from the British Open University, the United Kingdom Open University, China Open Education Resources for Education, CORE, the TESA materials that the Commonwealth of Learning and created in Sub-Saharan Africa, teacher education resources which are used internationally, COL as well as UNESCO joining together. OER Africa is a very powerful platform. CreativeCommons.org, certainly. COL and UNESCO that we saw in the previous slide, that they've joined together to bring out different kinds of open education resources. Merilot, which the journal got discontinued. I was sitting in the editorial board of the Merilot Journal, which is the most prestigious in the world when it started, but somehow 2013 or 14 the Merilot Journal discontinued. But Merilot continues. Multimedia educational resource for learning and online teaching from US, and this is a very powerful platform, most authentic as much as I know, now that I was sitting in the editorial board of their journal, but certainly this is the most prestigious and very authentic and qualitatively enriched platform. And there can be many more platforms that you could look at which could be discipline specific. So friends, what you see on your screen is the open education practices. On the left hand side, there is open learning and teaching practices, and the right hand side is qualities of open learning or open content. So right hand side, open content, when they join with open practices with the left hand side, you would call them as open education practices. So therefore, finally, what could be some of the authentic representation of open education practices are with you. As I said in the first PowerPoint, open education, open learning, open sharing, open pedagogy, open education resources, open pedagogy, and finally, open education practices. So what is an open education practice? In the first 2011, you will find as definition the practices which support the reuse and production of OER through institutional policies. That simply means there will be policy, promote innovative pedagogic models. So innovative pedagogic models must be used, and respect and empower learners as co-producers on their lifelong learning path. That would simply mean it's lifelong learning certainly, but the learners become co-producers of the content and the process and the activities and so on and so forth. In 2017, Catherine Cronin defined open education practices as a broad descriptor of practices that include the creation, use, and reuse of open educational resources, as well as open pedagogies and open sharing of teaching practices, collaborative practices that include the creation, use, and reuse of OER, as well as pedagogic practices employing participatory technologies and social networks and interaction, peer learning, knowledge creation, and empowerment of learners. So, a very wide definition in terms of at least wider resource networks that are available and how those resource networks could be chipped in to engage with your practice, because open education practice is institutional between professors and students based on curriculum and courses. So therefore, the wider social networks that could be brought in for peer learning as well as learner empowerment, and there is always a learner co-creation of content. Cape Town in 2008 defined open education is not limited to just educational resources. It also draws upon open technologies that facilitate collaborative, flexible learning and open sharing of teaching practices that empower educators to benefit from the best ideas of their colleagues. It may also grow to include new approaches to assessment, accreditation, and collaborative learning, especially JISC in Britain in 2012. It was a very comprehensive and very categorical production, management, use, and reuse of OERs. Developing and applying open and public pedagogies in teaching practices. Open learning and gaining access to open learning opportunities. Practicing open scholarship to encompass open access publication, open science, and open research. Open sharing of teaching ideas and knowledge and know-how, and using open technologies, web-based platforms, applications, services in an educational context. So finally, friends, on the left-hand side, if you compare the open education resources and right-hand side, open education practices, OER is about availability, OEP is an educational environment in which OER are created and used. So one is resources, the other one is an environment. The next left-hand side, it's an open learning material. Right-hand side, it is testing OER by building around activities and interaction to raise quality of learning. So it is more about enhancing the quality of learning, and the left-hand side, it is more about open learning resources or materials. 3, resource-based development and use, and right-hand side you find putting resources to open practices. So the openness is more specifically coming into the practice. 4, left-hand side, this can be used from traditional teacher-centered, exam-oriented context also. OERs can also be used there. But when you make it learner-centered, learner co-creation of content, and sharing culture of learning, learning experience over learning outcome. So learning experience becomes more important than the learning outcome. You are more into open education practices. And then finally, OER is generally context-free. And in OEP, open education practice goes beyond to enrich learning experiences in context. Resources, learners, teachers, and context. Therefore, context becomes very important even in open education practice. So friends, we have come to the end of the program. To summarize, we discussed open education, open learning, open education resources, open sharing, open pedagogy, and finally, open education practices. My summation is that we must try our best as an educational institution, even if we are face-to-face, more so in distance education and open university, we must move towards open education practices as much as possible across our different disciplines. Thank you very much.